Good afternoon. Good afternoon. The goal of this panel discussion is to inform all stakeholders of the issues related to the current corporate career and technology education and give information about how to transform any perceived concerns. The asking of questions is the beginning of knowledge. So think about everything you learned and ask questions about it. And then we will know that we are learning and can help everyone else. Thank you, panelists, for being here today. And we look forward to all the information that you will be able to give us and help us navigate the new career and technical education, because it is very different from the one I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Briefly explain what corporate career and technical education is and how it differs from traditional CTE.
Well, this one starts with me, and thank you for inviting me to speak here today on this very serious topic. I'd like to start by just saying that I think there are two different ideas about careers and students. And one is we like to believe, I'm assuming most of us here like to believe, that our students should have the freedom to and the access to a great education to get the skills that they need so that when they become older, seniors, they can self-actualize and pull everything together to decide what it is they want to do with their lives when it comes to a career. And the other side is the corporations, and they have their ideas of what they want, and they want to align what the students do in their schools to meet their needs, to meet their agenda. And so those are two kind of opposing forces, okay? And alignment are words that you see an awful lot when you talk about careers. But as far as career, the old CTE and the new CTE, the old CTE, we think of vocational ed. And vocational ed involved, of course, the manual labor where students who didn't want a four-year college experience signed on to work in auto mechanics and agriculture and construction, manufacturing, all the kind of hands-on skills that were incredibly important. They're very important skills for our country. And the Carl Perkins Act, excuse me, of 1984 specifically emphasized that vocational education should also be for underserved populations and including students with disabilities. That was very important. But vocational ed, very much like special ed, has sometimes unfairly been stigmatized as being a dumping ground. And so vocational ed always had kind of a stigma attached to it, unfortunately. And today's new high school CTE courses, they seem real shiny to me. And I guess because whenever I see pictures of students working in the labs, a lot of them are making robots and stuff, which is a little bit scary, but, it's good stuff and it's very attractive. It sort of takes away that stigma we had with vocational ed. And they work a lot with STEM, and they can actually get industry certification in careers like marine biology and aviation and environmental science. And aviation, our former Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos, her family has actually an aviation charter school, which I think they have one here in Virginia now. They have the original one in Western Michigan. And a lot of charter schools have jumped on the bandwagon for having CTE, and sometimes they make promises that they might not be able to keep with some of the things that they offer. But some of the ethical questions surrounding CTE, I think one is, are we really pushing our kids to do college too soon? Should they be doing CTE in high school? And one of the concerns with CTE in high school is some students might sign on to it because they see a four-year college as being unaffordable. Now, if they want those courses and they gravitate towards those like they would in vocational ed, that's great if that's what they want. But if corporations are pushing those CTE courses on them, that's a different kind of story. And then the other concern with CTE right now that I read was that, unfortunately, some of the underserved population and our kids with disabilities don't always have access to the CTE courses. So that is a concern. And so that's it for this one, I think, for me. Jeff, did you have anything you want?
Yeah, I have a few things I can add to that. I've reported about education for the past 10 years for national audiences. And I've been around the country viewing lots of different kinds of school districts, and I've seen some really good CTE, exciting CTE programs. For instance, one of the school districts I showcased in a report was Long Beach, California School District. They have a program that's commonly called linked learning, where they embed students by choice, the students choose to be there, into tracked courses where they learn about a specific type of industry. For instance, in Long Beach, there's a huge port there. And so students can learn about the functioning of the port while they're also learning about economics, world trade, and things like engineering. It's pretty exciting. But when I look at what CTE has become in Virginia, I see something that's completely different. I see something where corporations actually are writing the curriculum. It's not the teachers who have created these exciting courses. It's corporations such as Cisco or Ford or Amazon that actually do the coursework. And so that kind of CTE is very different from what most of us think about when we think about CTE, and that's why we're calling this corporate CTE. And recently, a professor from the London School of Economics named Velislava Hillman and I conducted some research in talking to families, not just in Virginia, but also in Colorado, about their experiences with these corporate-driven CTEs. And what came out in the discussions, it was a qualitative research piece that was eventually published in an academic journal. What came out in the study was that parents were concerned that their children were learning about not computer science, but how to work at Cisco. They were learning about not the retail business, but how to work at an Amazon warehouse. And what Dr. Hillman concluded in the paper was there's two big problems with this. First of all, there's the issue of content. Who owns the content? Who comes up with the content? If it's a corporation, that means it's not going through the typical channels of being approved by a democratic school board. And then the other big problem with that is the legitimacy. When we think of schools, we think about teachers having legitimate professional credentialing, right? We think about the education department in the state having expertise in curriculum. But in a corporate-driven CTE, it is the corporation that is given legitimacy, and a legitimacy that it's never ever had before. And also, it's a legitimacy that is not encompassing of public decision-making and the voices of students and parents. And so those issues are why corporate CTE is very different from other kinds of CTE that we normally would think about.
Another opportunity to ask critical questions. What was the original purpose of public education from its inception? Has there been a shift in federal levels to move towards workforce development?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. Well, as education historian Derek Black has observed. When the founders of this country came together and decided that public education was going to be important, they made that decision because of the radical notion of people electing their leaders. You have to realize that when, and the inception of this country, the idea that people were electing their leaders was radical. And they realized that that could impose a lot of problems, particularly if the electorate was ignorant. That was, and so the original purpose of schooling, at least according to the founders of the country, was to cultivate good citizens, to teach them the things that they would need to know to govern themselves. Now, it's true, back then, voters were primarily white men who owned property. So it was not a very democratic situation to begin with. But over time, that's changed somewhat, and schooling became more universal in some states where children of lesser means were brought in and taught the same things in the same buildings that well-to-do kids were being taught. And the idea was that they all had to participate in governance, so they should go to school together to do that. We see that idea reinforced again after the Civil War, during Reconstruction. The federal government realized that there were millions of slaves who were going to become citizens. There were millions of poor whites in the South who were going to become citizens, and they needed to have education. So in order for the southern states to be accepted back into the Union, they had to rewrite their constitution. And the federal government ensured that every state in the South put into their constitution the constitutional right to go to school and be educated. Now, that created some problems in the latter part of the 1800s when schools were inundated, of course, with all these new students who heretofore had not had access to schools. And they had to think, what are we going to teach them? They shouldn't necessarily be taught the same thing that well-to-do kids who initially were the only kids taught. So maybe we ought to try other forms of curriculum. And that's around the time when something called vocational education began. And the idea was that not every kid had to learn the classics. Not every kid had to read Plato and speak Latin and German. So they should learn how to work in certain kinds of jobs. They should have employable skills. But that led to a big problem with what we call tracking. And we'll get to the issue of tracking later in this discussion. But you could see in the late 1800s, the purpose of education started changing somewhat. And the government, the federal government in particular, began, I think it was around 1917, when they issued a law that provided money for schools to create vocational education courses. And so gradually we saw that employability was creeping more into the notion of why kids need to be educated. Progressive educators like Dewey hated this idea, but he was not always the person who was in charge, of course. And so we see employability become more of an issue in schools. But more recently, the idea that schools had to have some kind of relevancy to businesses has gained new ground and gotten more prominent spokespeople, Betsy DeVos, for instance. But also on the other side, Michelle Obama is a big fan of CTE. So we've seen lately, in particular, for instance, Rex Tillerson, who was the Secretary of State for Donald Trump. He made a statement that you hear often now, that businesses are education's #1 customers, and that businesses deserve a better product, talking about children as products. So there's always been this tension between what the purpose of education is, but it seems more so now the emphasis, at least state and federal level, is that there has to be more of an alignment with the work of the working world.
Did you want to respond to that?
Well, I'd just like to add that for me, I just remembered recently, A Nation at Risk was the report from the Reagan administration in 1983 that was really very negative about what our students were learning and how our schools were preparing them, how our teachers were preparing them. It was actually a very damning report about our schools. And, you know, a lot of people in America were concerned because Russia had just launched Sputnik, a satellite. And so we were, you know, sort of feeling like we were not competing like we should, and our kids were taking the blame. And A Nation at Risk really wasn't a fair or really an honest report. And there's been a lot of talk about it since then. David Berliner and Bruce Biddle wrote a book called The Manufactured Crisis in 1995. And they said, actually, in 1983, our students were going to college more than ever, and it should have been a time that we celebrate their successes. And also the American worker was doing very well. And if any of you are as old as I am, if you remember in the 80s, our kids were compared quite a bit to the Japanese. And I heard this a lot as a teacher at that time. And a few years after that, I didn't hear about the Japanese kids anymore. I didn't hear about their success stories. And I wondered why that was, why that disappeared. And I finally learned that it was because their economy kind of tanked. And so they couldn't compare their kids at school and their economy. And I often think now that when President Clinton was in office, our economy, we were told, was very good. But I don't ever remember one story about how great our kids were doing in high school. If we were associating our schools and the economy, why didn't we hear that? We never did, that I remember. But A Nation at Risk has, I think, followed us and haunted this country since 1983. It opened the door to the Chamber of Commerce, to venture philanthropists, to the Business Roundtable. It formed our policy with NCLB, with Race to the Top. You know, our kids couldn't walk quietly to the top holding hands with each other, could they? They had to race. They had to compete with each other. And now we have the Every Student Succeeds Act. It opened the door to charters and vouchers because, of course, our public schools have constantly been criticized. And I think it started from that report. So now we've got these push-down programs and that even affect our youngest learner. You know, our youngest kids are being in this state. They have this career awareness and exploration tracking where even elementary school students are to explore the different occupations that are associated with career clusters. This is from kindergarten to 5th grade. Now, you might ask a kindergarten what they want to be when they grow up, and they might tell you a mermaid. You know what? Little children, they love to talk about careers, but I don't think they are old enough to really consider what kind of career they really want to do and why are we starting to track them. And when you read about this policy, it says that the academic and career plan portfolio in elementary grades is to include the information about interest values such as dependability and responsibility. I see that they're trying to collect data on our kids and possibly their families, so that's a real concern. But the education, this belief still, and I think it still stems from a 40-year-old nation at risk, that our kids just need to work harder and faster. And they've had 40 years to get them working harder and faster, and they still aren't happy with it. You know, they're not happy with their own kinds of policy changes throughout the years. And so it's rather maddening. But when you look at young children especially and see how it has affected them, when you hear politicians say universal preschool and global economy in the same sentence, you cannot understand why, why that is. And a few years ago, the University of Virginia did a study, and they found that kindergarten is actually the new first grade. Kindergartners are doing first grade work, and we wonder why they're failing. Well, maybe it's because it's developmentally inappropriate, right? And I like Secretary Ed Cardona. I think he tries to do a good job, but I also think he's probably connected and has some corporate strings attached, of course. But he's come out now with a motto: we have to raise the bar. Now, if you're going to raise the bar on kindergartners, where are they going, to fifth grade? I mean, how many times can you make it harder on them? And just to end, I'm getting on my soapbox here, but in 1998, the superintendent of Atlanta, Benjamin O. Canada, said, "We are intent on improving academic performance, and you don't do that by having kids hanging on monkey bars." He eliminated recess. Can you imagine? Recess for young children. Everybody needs a break in anything that they do. Susan Ohanian, an educator, wrote a book about recess, and she said even in Hollywood, the animals that they use on set have to have a break. But yet we took away recess for kids, okay? And a lot of parents have been activists on this issue and have tried to reinstate recess. But in some districts, they still have things like brain breaks, and we wonder why we need to have kids do self-meditation. They need to be active. They need to have a lot of unstructured play. So, when it comes to the workforce infringing upon our schools, they've just done a really bad job of it. And if our kids are doing poorly today, they should look at some of the things that they have instated that have put so much pressure on them. So.
Great, and you open the door to some of our next questions. In Virginia, the state code requires the development of academic and career portfolios that include information about interests, values, such as dependability, responsibility, and skills supporting decisions about future interests and goals that begin in kindergarten. Yeah, that's really great, isn't it? Grades K-5, career awareness and exploration that includes goals such as identify career choices through exploration. Can you discuss how this type of career tracking can affect the growth of the whole child?
I'll go ahead and add to that because I think I was just talking about that. But, even in this state, in middle school, they are working to counsel students on post-secondary education. Students can't even enjoy middle school without being told what they have to do for post-secondary education. And they're, talking to students about having industry certifications, occupational competency credentials, professional licenses in career and technical education, and they're also encouraging them to take at least 3 advanced placement AP classes. Of course, advanced placement is through the College Board, which has essentially privatized a lot of what is taught now in our high schools, because our students in high schools have to take these courses that end in tests. They're mostly working towards taking a test. And our college courses, they're considered to be like college. And so we're just really pushing everything down on kids and not questioning how appropriate the ages are for what they're doing or what kinds of pressures. We have these, I listened this morning to these heartfelt discussions about the mental health, the needs that our students have. And I think we have to tie it into what the expectations we have of them for the ages that they are, I think. And a lot of that is because of the expectations the workforce, the corporations have now on them. So anyway, hope that covers that a little bit.
Yeah, I can add a little bit more. Virginia's not, I know we're talking a lot about Virginia today for good reason, but Virginia's not the only state that's pushing this kind of idea. Indiana also requires eighth graders to take self-assessments through the state's online Career Explorer channel. Colorado has a similar situation where in order to go to high school, you have to take a survey, you have to take an assessment about what you want to do when you grow up. I believe it's the required surveys done during the middle grades. Delaware has a similar program where students have to, at a relatively young age, fill out a survey about what their proclivities are, what their interests are, what they want to do when they go into the workforce. But one thing we haven't touched on that we probably should look at today, we should talk about today is what kind of research has been done on these career programs, and it's a pretty mixed bag. In a 2018 study of Massachusetts' CTE program found that participation in a high-quality CTE did boost on-time graduation, which I guess is good. And it boosted it significantly. But another study found that taking career classes in high school increased students' odds of graduating on time, but didn't improve their college enrollment. So that could, be a pro or a con. A reporter with Chalkbeat named Matt Barnum analyzed a European study on the impact of CTE and found out a significant downside of these programs because students, they might have benefited early in their careers, but later on it harmed them when the job market changed. So we have to think about what we're pushing students into when we inculcate further into them the idea that education is just about getting a specific kind of job.
Now that we have collected all of this data, did you want to say something? Okay. Now that we are collecting all of this data, now we've got to decide what to do with it. Please discuss how the mining of student data is occurring and being used by corporations.
I can start with that. Well, I think we all have become to just kind of accommodate and assume data mining is something that's happening all the time. I can always tell when my wife has been shopping on Amazon because ads for things start appearing on my Facebook page. And so we know that data mining is a fact of life. You can either, I don't think we want to get into that today, but what we do want to talk about is what is the implications of data mining for children enrolled in a program of education. Please keep in mind that children are enrolled in school because they have to be. It's compulsory. So they don't have any choice about whether their data is being shared or not. But we should talk about, what's going on with data mining. And firstly, there is a federal law that governs student privacy. It's called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. People usually refer to it as FERPA. But in 2011, during the Obama administration, the law was significantly weakened by allowing companies to act as proxies for school districts. In other words, companies have the same leeway of how they use the data as a school district would. And also it provides a loophole for companies to share data with a third-party entity. Now think about that. Data about children is being shared with people who do marketing, who want to sell kids stuff, either early in their life or later on. So we have these CTE programs where students are diligently filling out these surveys saying what they want to do later in life. And in the meantime, that information is being shared. According to a recent study by an organization called Common Sense Media, nearly 3/4 of the most popular apps and online platforms directed at children are profiting from the user data, even if those companies claim that they are not. Instead of selling things like names and birthdays, what these companies do is charge third parties to create user profiles. In other words, kids are grouped as a certain kind of profile that is then traded on like a commodity among companies to use for their profit. Data can include both the activity within the apps that the children are using, or it can sometimes use broader internet data, like where kids go after they leave the app and what other sites they're visiting. It allows companies to get a very specific, individualized list of preferences and behaviors for the users, even if there's no name and phone number. Another study by the Internet Safety Lab found 96% of apps used regularly in schools share students' personal data to marketing firms and build extensive profiles of children to sell their products through targeted advertising. So the implications here are that, let's say, a student expresses in a job survey an interest in becoming a gaming designer later on in life. Well, a gaming company could eventually get that data and use it to construct all kinds of products and services that attract business from that kid as he's maturing. I don't think that's something that parents sit easy with. The idea that their child is serving as a sort of marketing profile for a company's business. I think Nancy also has something to say about this.
Well, I think this might run into one of the questions that we have that is involves how are corporations helping to write curriculum in K-12. Is that the next question?
That's the next
Okay.
question. Why don't
Well,
I
this-
ask it?
You
Is
go
that way
ahead.
you can
Okay, you go
put it
ahead.
all
and
in
then
there.
we'll go in with what he was just saying.
What are the implications with the process of corporations rewriting K-12 public school curriculum? Those two questions are going to be answered together.
Okay, well, first of all, along with Jeff, the College Board is very instrumental, as you know, in education. They make them a lot of money. It's really privatizing, I think, high school to have kids relying on AP courses, which the College Board does, and then they have to take the ACT or the SAT tests that the College Board does. And talk about data mining, the College Board can track students and share their information with other groups like Adobe, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Snapchat, Yahoo, and additional ad media, as that kind of goes along with what Jeff was saying. But SEL, social emotional learning, is also very big now. It's very popular. And they collect a lot of information there. And CASEL is behind social emotional learning. And we like to think that our kids will feel good about themselves. And so it's kind of a nice thing. Some of the things that they do under the umbrella of social emotional learning can be very good. But there's also quite a lot of assessment on behavior that's a little bit of a concern, where they're data mining, I believe. And some of that, CASEL emphasizes the workforce and future ready. A key goal of preschool to high school education is to ensure that students are future ready with the knowledge, skills, and drive to navigate their careers and lives. Well, that sounds really good, but they do collect a lot of information. In Fairfax, Panorama is an assessment. It has people like, I think, I'm pretty sure it's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and some other companies. It might be the Chan Zuckerberg group too. I'm not sure about them, but I'm pretty sure about Gates. And they screen children twice a year to collect their behavioral information, and some of that is quite invasive, okay? Very personal questions. So that's a real concern. Now, in Arlington, Amazon is going to set up, I don't know if they've started their outfit there yet, their HQ2, I guess it's called. They have already, they've done some nice things during the pandemic, I think, to make nice with the community. They came in and worked with communities and schools to give the kids headphones and things for their remote learning while they were at home. And they kind of endear themselves to everyone. And now they're giving to the schools, a couple of schools, they have provided what's called the Amazon Web Services Think Big Space. And what these are they call them educational incubators, and they use cloud computing and various AWS and Amazon technologies for kids to work digitally online. So they have this information being collected. And it's interesting that when you talk about incubating ideas and collecting information, this is Amazon again, they've come into the school with this great gift to the school. When you talk about it, they have put a gifted teacher in charge of this program that they have. So can you see eager, gifted kids getting online and giving these neat ideas to Amazon? And, are they going to get credit for those ideas? I mean, who knows? I don't think so, though. But, the principal says, she's just thrilled. And she would be. I mean, any principal who gets a gift from Amazon is going to accept it, especially if your school is cash strapped and you don't have a lot of money. But the principal says, with the world becoming increasingly digital, STEM education is more important than ever, and the state-of-the-art STEM labs, such as our new Think Big Space, are vital in exposing students to STEM discipline, careers, and opportunities. And then the Amazon representative comes back and says that thinking small is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So leaders communicate a bold direction, and that inspires results. We must think differently and look around corners for a way to serve customers. Okay, so they're thinking of customers. But the whole point is, when companies come into school and create these programs for the schools and then collect data from the kids, they're really kind of, I think, infringing upon what we expect schools to be, and the freedom for the community to decide what the school will do. And so I think that can be a very big problem. And they also have a program called Code Virginia, which is a nonprofit computer science advocacy organization, and it involves childhood to career computer science programs. And you don't want to rule out that some of these things can be very helpful. Technology can be helpful, but I think it has to be kind of monitored, and I think maybe we need some kind of regulation where we look at how these companies are able to participate in what the schools do. So.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about Amazon. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about Amazon. During my research into corporate CTE, I came across a New York Times Magazine article about Amazon's influence in California, including a section on career technical education courses taught at a high school in San Bernardino. And in this case, students wore shirts emblazoned with the Amazon logo to the classes. And they learn in a classroom designed to emulate the inside of an Amazon facility. Yeah. And according to the article, the lesson of the day was on Amazon's 14 leadership principles. And a giant sweepstakes-style Amazon check in the classroom bears the $50,000 figure that Amazon donated to start the program. $50,000, of course, doesn't even cover the cost of the teacher. Nevertheless, schools, like Nancy said, they'll take $50,000, but Amazon's taking a whole lot more than they're giving, for sure. A little bit more about Amazon. Amazon has partnered with 4 Virginia school districts to adopt the company's Amazon Web Services, Amazon AWS, and its program called AWS Education. AWS Education gives school districts that incorporate AWS education resources into their programs allow high school students to enroll for college classes that include the curriculum, as well as provide cloud credentialing. Both the teachers and the students can earn their cloud credentialing through AWS. AWS is also a product that the schools can buy. In 2019, AWS division generated $25 billion in sales. That's the size of Starbucks. And it's Amazon's most profitable business. With Amazon's ability to use AWS education as an entree into the school district's curriculum and teacher professional development programs, the company can create a relationship with the schools to sell its data storage contracts. So in other words, AWS is storing the data from the school that the teachers and the students are providing to AWS. And then Amazon can go and sell that data on the market. It's a perfect business model for Amazon, but it's called free labor for the children. And so Amazon, is not the only company that works these gigs. There are other companies that do it, but I think it's just the most blatant and flagrantly concerning.
Explain Go Virginia and how its regional industry model is being tied to workforce training in K-12 public schools.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about Go Virginia because I got into that issue too in my research. Go Virginia is what's often referred to as a public-private partnership. In other words, it has kind of a quasi-governmental role, but it's mostly business leaders that are in charge of Go Virginia. By the way, Go stands for growth and opportunity. And one of the things that Go Virginia has put into place is it's sectioned off the state into regional labor markets. And it's based on the needs of businesses that happen to be in that part of the state. For instance, in Southwest Virginia, the regional labor market there is mostly on mining and manufacturing, whereas in Northern Virginia, the labor market is more about marketing and consulting and engineering services that are much more expensive, about politics. So after dividing the state into these labor markets, Go Virginia also advocates for CTE programs in each of those markets that are geared to the labor market that Go Virginia has decided the CT program ought to be gearing toward. So in other words, Go Virginia makes assumptions about kids in certain parts of Virginia, what they ought to do with their education, and eventually what kind of job they ought to have. Keep in mind that Go Virginia, like I said, is a quasi-public private entity, but there's no public voice in Go Virginia. Ordinary Virginians have no voice whatsoever in what Go Virginia is doing, and yet they have this power to put together these structural systems that push children into places that maybe they don't want to go. But the public gets no say so in that.
Do you want to answer part of that?
Well, I guess, I agree. They tend to push kids into internships and dual enrollment and career services. They seem to be, proposing for talent pathways and industry recognized credentials. And, all of that really gives them so much control. And I saw a video on this, and they seem to be, on one hand, wanting to move away from the federal government and yet still use some of their funds and become even more privatized. But it just doesn't sound like very good, a very good deal for our kids.
Yeah, in terms of relating the clout that Go Virginia has, Go Virginia awarded $5 million in grants to an expansion of an organization called Go TEC. It's a program that is constructing a talent pathway initiative for networking, automation, and robotics. Another grant went to the United Way of Southwest Virginia to develop a talent pipeline of IT workers that will assess employer needs and align curriculum to those kinds of jobs. Another grant went to the Hampton Roads Workforce Council to lead a comprehensive data-driven approach to building a tech talent pipeline. Grants from Go Virginia totaling $2.4 million each have gone to Chesapeake and Loudoun County. So we're talking about a lot of big money here that's being pushed around and influencing people.
I'm going to intersect, which is, this is not normally for the moderator to do. But I want to ask, how many people was born in Chesterfield County, lived all your life in Chesterfield County, and plan to transition from Chesterfield County? Oh, we all move around, and yet they are making these industries for that area as if that kid is going to stay there for the rest of its life. Interesting, isn't it? Please explain what apprenticeship programs are and how you see that they are changing.
Well, again, when you think about apprenticeship, I can think of some really great ways to use that with high school students by asking young people what it is they're interested in a career and having them perhaps shadow people in those careers. That would be really nice if that's what an apprenticeship program was. But unfortunately, and I'm not sure if they're doing a lot of apprenticeship programs with CTE because they're expensive, but I think there's a lot of chatter about them. And if you know, this is something I was researching and trying to find where they're using apprenticeships, and I couldn't find a lot on it, except there's a lot of chatter about planning for it. And they talk about, they use apprenticeships and internships and externships in the same light. One of the things I found that there's a group called Jobs for the Future, which is creating a framework where they want secondary apprenticeship programs. Apprenticeship programs are done and have been done for years very successfully in European countries. So I think some people are looking at that model. But what they'd like to do, I think, I found some information from Excel and Ed, which is former Governor Jeb Bush's group, which has a lot of influence on education around the country. And they had like a CTE toolkit, and they had part of it, they had a chapter on apprenticeships. And what they said was rather interesting. They talk about this program as being funded by the taxpayer, and they don't imply that it's going to be, like I just described, a nice wholesome program for a student to choose what it is they want to do and who they want to be an apprentice for or with. Instead, they say this. They say the hired position must be linked to an occupation that the state has identified as high demand, high skill, and middle or higher level wages at a statewide or regional level using labor market data. So, again, a lot of us think in terms of our children should have the freedom to decide what it is they want to do with their careers. And the corporations, on the other hand, are wanting to align what the students do for their agenda, for their needs, and to also fill gaps. You'll see that an awful lot. Oh, they need to fill their gaps. But unfortunately, I think it really isn't beneficial to a student if they have to do what they're being told to do and not what they really would like to do. They don't have the freedom to choose what they want to do. And taxpayers are essentially going to pay for this person to go and work for the company. So we're paying for their assistance, for their company assistance. So it isn't quite the kind of apprenticeship we might imagine. So.
Yeah, really, right now, what's very in vogue is for people to point to Germany, where there is a very structured form of apprenticeships in their education system. But if you know anything about Germany, you know that the U.S. it ain't Germany. And so what the danger is with apprenticeships, although it's an age-old form of relationships that can be very good. The danger always is how they can be an avenue for exploitation. One of the schools I came across, for instance, in my research, is a charter school near Houston named Premier High School. It's located inside a business called Gallery Furniture that offers a so-called CTE course of study in electrical welding and carpentry, but most of its training is on the job at Gallery Furniture, where students are trained 4 days a week, and then one day they work for Gallery Furniture to pay off the costs of their education. Yeah. So the school is getting 1 day per week of free labor in addition to free workforce training at taxpayer expense. For the students who graduate and decide to stay with Gallery Furniture, Gallery Furniture is getting free workforce training. There's also a chain of a nationwide chain of religious private schools called Cristo Rey that in many states now qualify for voucher money. They operate a work-study arrangement in which students work for local employers. They call it apprenticeships, for local employers while they attend the school. According to the chain's marketing materials, 50% of the school's costs are covered by the work-study arrangement. So in other words, students are paying for 50% of their education through their own uncompensated labor. So apprenticeships can be a fine thing, but we have to decide, we have to have some firm governance here about when they lead to exploitation.
Please examine the steady rise in the use of child labor, and child labor is under the age of 16 across the country. Several states, such as Arkansas and Iowa, have rolled back minimum age and labor oversights and have expanded the types of occupations children are allowed to work in, and some of those occupations are not safe. Who wants to ask first?
Well, I've already, yeah.
You kind of covered that a little.
Yeah, I've covered that a little, but we can go further. The more about that Arkansas law, it, okay, it rolls back a number of child labor protections across the state, including a measure that had required employers to obtain work certificates for children under the age of 16. So now that, under the age of 16, no problem there. We're not even going to bother with you making that a record, on record activity. The new law called the Youth Hiring Act, that sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Will eliminate the requirement that children aged 14 and 15 seeking a job acquire a document issued by the Director of Division in Labor, which includes the child's work schedule and a description of their work duties. States like Missouri, Iowa, and Minnesota are now considering looser child labor laws. Ohio just passed a law showing allowing 14 and 50-year-olds to work till 9 p.m. all year long. Per the Iowa bill, children as young as 14 could be allowed to work in certain jobs in meat packing plants. The bill would also protect businesses from responsibility if a child were to get injured while on the job. The Iowa Department of Labor has so far signed off on this is no problem. How many of you saw the article in the New York Times last week about the Virginia boy in rural Virginia working at a Purdue plant at nighttime? He's 14 years old, and he was maimed by one of the machines. If you read down deeply into the article, you read that the children in that school district go to school every day with backpacks that have the Purdue insignia on the backpack. They get school supplies with Purdue's logo on the supplies. And yet we have, according to the article, scores of these students working in the Purdue plants at nighttime instead of getting a good night's sleep before they go to school in the morning. So this is, I know it's a little bit far afield from the corporate CTE, but I think what we're trying to get across here is that the whole idea of merging business thinking with education has a lot of problems to it.
Well, I'd just like to add that, I certainly agree with that. And I think somehow, I find hope in the people who are running for office now that perhaps we can create better laws that stop some of this stuff and focus more on our children. I mean, this is America. We're supposed to be a really ethical and great country, right? And so we have to hold our leaders accountable and have them start addressing the issues surrounding schools and really lifting our schools to be the democratic institutions they're supposed to be. But we should have rules that address how corporations are allowed to affect our children. So.
Okay, we've reached the end of our questions at this point. If you would like to ask more questions of Nancy and Jeff, use your yellow cards and please do voice what you would like to hear more from them about, and give them a big thank you for being here, please. And for Ms. Washington.